a Sunday school teacher said, I really want to be in there. I want to be part of this conversation. I want to hear the things. I think I'll move over a bit to the center. I want to hear these things, demonstrating a commitment to the church, but also a commitment to their ministry where they knew they needed to be with the students that they were leading. And so we are live streaming this right now, and it will be a YouTube link for subscribers. You'll be getting information about how to look at it again. If you missed one of the Sundays coming up, it will be a YouTube link that you are able to view. Also, since we are trying to record this for those who aren't able to be with us this morning, later on as you have a question, we will ask that you stand, and if you speak loudly, that mic or some of the room mics we have positioned around ought to be able to pick up your comment. So be careful what you whisper to your neighbor right now. No, it's not that sensitive, but we do want those who aren't here to be able to participate with us remotely or at a different time. Join me in prayer. Father, thank you for Bethel. Thank you for strategically placing Bethel in this location to impact this corner of the world for your glory. Help us to look at ourselves with open eyes so that we can move forward in being the church you are calling us to be, to capturing your vision of what you have for us to do and being fully committed to that vision. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Let me briefly review the 5 stages of the interim process. Stage number 1 was connecting with people. That was the first 3 months. A lot of dinners, a lot of lunches, a lot of conversations, a lot of interviews, a lot of learning about the church and learning about you, a lot of connecting with you, and really love that stage. And hopefully that connecting is still going to go on throughout the interim process. I love the people here. I love this church. It's been a delight to be here. Kelly and I, we couldn't wait to get back here last week, even though the temperature was quite different. And so we are still continuing on in this connecting process. But one of the reasons for the connecting is just to learn about the church, to assess the health of the church. As I had my conversations with people, I was making observations. And then the main part of the assessing of the health was doing the survey, the Ministry Insight tool. And so bringing the Ministry Insight tool together with observations I've made, conversations with people, we are coming to the point where we have a pretty good picture of the health of Bethel. And just like when you go to a doctor and the doctor runs all the tests on you and assesses the health, and then he sits down in the office with you saying, here's what we've discovered. It's then you have a choice to make. What are we going to do about it? You can argue about the results, get a second opinion, or you might say, well, okay, I see that as being the case. Now, what are we going to do about it? And so that's the stage we are moving into. Stage 3, facilitating action. We did the Ministry Insight tool. It is something that is unique to Interim Pastors Ministries. Honestly, this is my first, for full disclosure, this is my first time to use the Ministry Insight tool. I am much more adept at another tool called Natural Church Development. Use that on several occasions. So I'm starting to learn a new language and starting to learn a new tool, a tool that I think is in many ways much more powerful than the Natural Church Development Survey was. You took the survey a couple of months ago. Next slide says the MIT was completed by 89 individuals, which was about 53.9% of the adults. who are a regular part of the church family. And those who put the survey together and analyzed the survey said, this is a great response from the congregation. We would love 100%, but no church gets 100%. And so from their perspective, from their experience, this is a great response from the congregation. It is important to remember that the results are the opinions and the assessment of the members of the congregation as they reflect upon the ministry of our church. I love that. It's not me telling you this is what I see. It is you telling me this is what you see. It is you telling each other this is what you see at Bethel. And so there's incredible insight and power in that. 53.9% of the congregation completed the survey. The next couple of slides are a breakdown of those who did the survey. On this slide, you see where the large groupings of people are from 35 to 74, and especially from 45 to 64, the largest grouping of people who completed the survey. The next slide, you see the number of years that people have been attending Bethel, those who completed the survey. Even these two slides give some insight into the health of Bethel. These two slides give some insight into the condition of Bethel at this time. It does skew a bit older. It does skew a bit to those who have been at church a long, long time. And sometimes you might look at the slides and say, well, what about newer attenders? It's not that they're not here, but maybe they just don't feel part of it where they think their feedback or their insight is valuable. By the way, I forgot to mention that I am going to print copies of the report that you can pick one up next week after the conversation. I wanted to walk through some of the report first. So I want you to have insight. There's power in knowledge, and I want you to have all the knowledge that you can possibly have. A couple more slides about the dynamics of this survey. Those who did the survey, 50% served in some kind of ministry, but not necessarily leading the ministry. And as far as frequency of attendance, vastly, the response came from those who are here every weekend. And so we can say that this survey is the viewpoint of those who are long time at Bethel, who are deeply involved in Bethel, who love Bethel, who have a high commitment to Bethel. And so this is what those people are seeing at Bethel. Some of the mechanics of the test. The survey ranks responses into three categories: strengths, concerns, and challenges. There were 48 statements, and these 48 statements, as they are tabulated, they came back either as a strength. That's something that 65% plus of the people would strongly or moderately agree with. Or then you had the concerns and the challenges where 20 plus percent of the people would disagree with that statement. So those are just the categories that they have developed to help us understand and interpret the results of the test. There were 48 statements. Of these 48 statements, 10 are considered to be strengths of the church, which is good. 7 are considered to be concerns, and then 31 statements are challenges. 31 statements, a large number of people would disagree with that statement that was presented in the survey. So 10 strengths, 7 concerns, 31 challenges. Some of the strengths we can celebrate. I know when you take a test, if you were like me, if you didn't get 100, you look at the questions you missed and say, how could I miss that one? And we want to look at the bad areas, the concerns, the challenges. But let's not miss the strengths. There are things that can be celebrated. This was the number one strength. Everyday choices I make at home and work are guided by my relationship with God and Scripture. What an incredible strength. If as a church we want to see people discipled, if we want to see people living life in relationship with Jesus Christ, you're doing that. This is an incredible strength. Don't miss this strength by just jumping to the 31 challenges. Bethel is having a tremendous impact on the lives of people where everyday choices are being guided by a person's relationship with Jesus Christ. The second statement, second of the 48 statements that was viewed as a strength, is I am passionate about the future of our church, and I'm willing to help our leaders move us toward the changes and transformation needed to fulfill God's vision for us. What an amazing strength to have during a time of transition. I know the last couple of years or so hasn't been easy for the church. It would be easy to be downcast. It would be easy to be disappointed and dejected. But there's a great optimism about what God is going to be doing here at the church in the future. I mean, having folks that are passionate about the future, that's a good thing to be able to work with. That speaks well of what the church will be able to accomplish in the future. And then the third top strength is I generously serve my church with my time, my talents, and my treasures. And that is clearly evident at Bethel. It's amazing the number of people involved in ministry. I mean, any church that has Awana has a lot of people involved in ministry. And any church that does Awana as good as this church does has a lot of people involved in ministry. And it isn't just Awana, but so many other areas of ministry. The number of people who are part of worship teams, it's incredible. The number of people serving in places here at Bethel. And so amidst all the concerns, amidst all the challenges, there certainly are things that we can celebrate. But there are challenges. You told me this was the third challenge. We'll give you the top three. This came in number 3. The third ranking challenge was our church has an intentional discipleship process in place to facilitate Christian growth and maturity. You're letting me know that isn't happening. You're letting me know there isn't a discipleship pathway. Every church needs a discipleship pathway. Every church needs a process by which we have our first engagement with that individual to the point where we know they are a believer in Jesus Christ. Then as a believer in Jesus Christ, we have an intentional process of growing and developing them as a disciple of Christ. It isn't something that just happens. It isn't something absorbed by osmosis. There needs to be an intentional discipleship pathway whereby we say to an individual, if you are a believer in Jesus Christ, and if you commit to us as your church family, we are going to bring to you the resources and the people and the programs and the ministry to grow you as a fully developed follower of Christ. The second ranking challenge is our church equips and develops leaders at all levels of church ministry who in turn reproduce more leaders. Not only does a church need a discipleship pathway, but a church needs a leadership development program. Not just a program, but a church needs built into its DNA the concept that everybody who is leading a ministry has a Titus with them, has somebody with them that they are investing in, has somebody with them that they are raising up to lead the ministry, and that there is this intentional development of leaders, and we regularly hand off ministries to other leaders, and you're telling me that that isn't happening. And here's the number one challenge which you reported on. Our church excels at bringing new people into church life, developing friendships, and then they are actively able to contribute to the life of the church. That isn't happening. People come, and I've talked to a number of people. This confirms something I've seen and heard, where people come, and people have come for years, and they will say they really don't know anybody at Bethel. They come and they see a lot of good relationships, and they desperately long for these relationships, but they don't know how to have one of these relationships. Or people come and they are passionate about an area of ministry. They are gifted in an area of ministry, and they want to serve in that area of ministry, but they don't know how to do that. They don't know how to ask. They don't know how to become involved. Nobody pursues them to find out how they can use their giftedness, their passion, their abilities in ministry. So that was the number one challenge that you reported to me. In this survey, it looks at 12 different areas of church life, 12 characteristics of a faithful and a fruitful church. The main evaluative purpose of this survey was to look at these 12 characteristics of a healthy church. You have the list in front of you. As we look at this list, you may want to take a guess and rank them in your mind. You know, what's number one and what's number two and 3, 4, on and on down the list. How do you think we did? What do you think our strengths are? On this list, 3 of these characteristics point upward in our relationship with God as a church that is vertically oriented. Is there engaging worship? Is there transformative preaching? Is there corporate prayer? These 3 elements should be present in a healthy, vibrant church. 3 of the elements point outward: outreach and evangelism, hospitality and connecting with people, absorbing them into the life of the church, community engagement. What is our presence? What is our reputation in the region? 3 of the characteristics point inward to a church. Is there spiritual formation taking place? Discipleship? Are there healthy relationships? And are people being released into areas of ministry? And then 3 are administrative in their structure. Is there a support system in place as we release people into ministry? Is there a support system in place that enables us to be outward focused? Is there visionary leadership? Is there leadership development? Is there a strategy and structure in place to help us accomplish our vision? Or does that strategy and structure impede us from accomplishing the vision that God has for us? And so you took the survey. You answered the questions. You gave the results. The next slide shows us how you rank these 12 characteristics. In these 12 characteristics, there was one that you would say would be a strength of Bethel, and that is transformative preaching. That's always been a strength at Bethel. That is something that is always very important and very dear and very necessary at Bethel. The Word of God is front and center. It's what we are about as a church. And so transformative preaching is important, and it was rated at a strength. Everything else in the list comes back as a concern or as a challenge. It's when you get down to healthy relationships that the balance really turns to being things that are challenges for a church. And so the number one strength you reported on was transformative preaching. Next was ministry mobilization. The questions you answered asked a lot about your involvement in ministry and the ministries you see taking place. And so that came back pretty good. 65 would be considered a strength. And so it got pretty close to a strength, but not quite there. Visionary leadership, there's a huge drop between the 63.7 of ministry mobilization to the 43.9 of visionary leadership. On your list, you have a definition of what visionary leadership means: leading and equipping people to serve Christ's vision for our church. Is that vision clearly stated? One of the questions had you write down what the vision of Bethel is. And there is quite a bit of fogginess as to what the vision of the church is. The next, number 4, is engaging worship. It came back as strength, 44%, but in general, it is a bit of a concern. And the engaging worship has more to do than just the quality of the first half hour on Sunday morning. If I haven't said it before, let me say it now. I firmly believe that what happens the first half hour on Sunday morning is more important than what happens the second half hour on Sunday morning. I believe that what happens in worship is more important than what happens in preaching. The first half hour isn't meant to prepare your hearts to hear the word of God. No, the first half hour is when you come into the presence of God and you commune with God, you communicate with God, you experience his power and presence. You have come in from a week of living for God, and now you are ready just to celebrate and to enjoy and to worship him. And nothing is more important than that. And so in engaging worship, it has more to do than just with the quality of what happens during that singing time on Sunday morning. It also has to do with the spiritual vitality of the church and us living as worshipers, not just doing worship on Sunday morning, but that doing worship transforms into a characteristic of our lives where we are people who present ourselves as living sacrifices to God. You see, the next on the list is outreach and evangelism, reaching out to others in word and deed, showing and sharing the good news. Next on the list is spiritual formation. You have already expressed that as being a huge concern, where we encourage one another to love God with all of our hearts and to daily live out our faith. That's sort of ranked in the middle here, because if you remember the number one strength, people are doing this. But the number 3 weakness is we aren't helping others to learn how to do this. And so it's no surprise that this would end up in the middle of our list. Healthy relationships is on the list. I know that surprises some people. It surprises some people because there are many in the church who have healthy relationships. But what this survey is telling us is that of those who are deeply committed to Bethel, a lot of them see we don't have healthy relationships. Again, this comes from people, most of whom are probably in healthy relationships. And so you have to wonder about those who did not take the survey. My hunch is this would even be much lower, where they see healthy relationships, but they aren't experiencing them. Next on the list is community engagement, intentionally embracing our community to transform it with the love of Christ. Bethel is doing some good things. Awana and Underground are excellent things. Roston with his basketball 2 nights a week, that's excellent. But there are other things we can do to engage our community, to have that life-giving presence within our community. You see next on the list, corporate prayer. Corporate prayer, regularly expressing our utter dependence upon God in all things. I thought I might get an amen from Michael this morning, where this is coming across as a challenge. It's one of his passions to move us to prayer. And in the next few months, that is one of my intents, is to move us to prayer. As we engage in the search process, it is a process that needs to be bathed in prayer. So much so that my intent on Sunday morning is to finish the conversation by 11:35 or 11:40. And then I'm going to challenge and encourage you to grab 1 or 2 people and sit somewhere in the sanctuary and spend a few minutes in prayer for Bethel, to spend a few minutes in prayer for me and the elders as we lead Bethel through this transition time, to spend a few minutes in prayer for the search team that will be formed hopefully next month or March at the latest, to spend a few moments in prayer for the person that God would bring here, and to spend a few moments in prayer for his whole transition into the life of Bethel. We need to pray. We need to pray more. We need to pray more intently and more focused about this search process. You see next on the survey, hospitality and connections. It's similar to healthy relationships, but this really is more looking out of the relationships we are already connected with. It is welcoming and helping others to develop new friendships. One of the things the church needs is a process of assimilation. What are we going to do with a person the first time they walk through the doors until 6 months when they're able to connect with 6 people and connect with a place of ministry where they are serving or they are being served? It should be our goal that for anybody coming into Bethel within 6 months, they know 6 people and they have an identifiable place where they are connected. We need a process to strengthen hospitality and connections. And then strategy and structure. You see the definition. Organizing ourselves to support our mission rather than hindering efficient, effective, and fruitful ministry. It's the administrative structure of the church. It's elders, it's councils, it's deacons, it's ministry teams. How does it work? Why isn't it working? I have yet to meet a person who said we've got our administration figured out. It's working like a charm. Met a number of people who have indicated some serious concerns about how the church has structured itself, that in some ways we have been frozen because of the structure. There's not a way of moving people into ministry, not a way of moving people out of ministry, not that we want to do that. There's not a way of making sure that what we are doing is helping us achieve our mission as a church. And so a lot of work needs to be done with the administrative structure. What is the role of the elders? What do they do? What don't they do? One of my biggest questions is, where are the deacons? What is a good biblical definition of deacon, and where are they at Bethel? Let me give you a hint. If you look at the New Testament, a deacon does more than just buildings and grounds. A deacon is involved in many, many deeply spiritual kinds of issues, and we wonder where is this group? And then the number one or the lowest ranking characteristic, the area in which we we're most furthest from being a healthy church is in leadership development. A phrase I have often heard is that we need a generational change, which we do, but we need to make sure we have raised up good and godly people to lead us in areas of ministry. We need to make sure that there is a handoff, a passing of the baton in areas of ministry. We need to make sure that we are raising up young men and young women who will be that next generation of Bethel. And so these are the 12 characteristics. And these were how you ranked them. Let me pause for a moment and see if there are any questions or if you need any clarification or any surprises, any concerns. My goal this morning is to unpack some information, and then in the next coming weeks we will say, so what? Not meaning so what about that, but what are we going to do about it? There is a path forward. But the path begins when we have a clear picture of where we are at as a church. And nothing brings more clarity to where we are at as a church than the bottom of the page, the life cycle of a church. A church has a life cycle. Every living organism has a life cycle. It may be a mayfly that only lives for a few days, or it may be a giant tortoise that lives for a couple of centuries. Everything has a life cycle. We as people have a life cycle. We have our birth, and then we grow and develop. We become a teenager. We're in our 20s, our 30s, our prime of life, where we accomplish so much. And then you hit 40 and you start to, no, it's later than that. You hit 40, you hit some age and you start to decline. Every living organism has a life cycle. But the wonderful truth about the Church of Jesus Christ is He will build His church. And the wonderful truth about the Church of Jesus Christ is there is a way for a church to reset its life cycle. There is a way for a church to hit the reset button and to reinvigorate with new vision, with new structure, with new purpose, with new ministry. A church isn't condemned to go through this life cycle and die. A church is able to become reinvigorated. You see the life cycle. Notice the next slide. On the left side of the life cycle, areas of growth and development. You're outward focused. The church is just trying to survive, and we need people to survive. And so our whole intent, our purpose is looking out. And then when people come, we say, well, we got to take care of people. And you start looking in at people, and you start this process of navel gazing. And you can only look at your navel for too long before it doesn't become a very pretty sight. And we become inward focused, and we start a process of decline. There are huge differences between churches on the left slope and churches on the right slope, the descent. You see in the next slide some of the differences. A church on the left side, a church that has just been born, or a church that is growing and multiplying, is outward focused, but church that is maintaining becomes inward focused. How do we keep the constituents of the church happy? How do we keep the influencers of the church happy? It's all about what happens inside the church. On the left slope, the church is proactive. We're aggressive. We're reaching out. We want to get out there. We want to get things done. And now a church becomes reactive. Something goes wrong. We have to fix it. There's not much initiative. There's not much newness about it. Let me say one more thing I should have said earlier. The life cycle of a church has nothing to do with years. I know some rather young 60-year-olds, and I know some rather old 30-year-olds. I know some 60-year-olds who are just enjoying life, living life to the fullest, and I know some 30-year-olds who have already become curmudgeons. This has nothing to do with the number of years a church has been in existence. It has all to do with the culture within the church. A church that is in the growth phase, they are reproducing. In a church in the institutional phase or the declining phase, they are just trying to preserve. One church is mission-driven, the other is preference-driven. Mission-driven, what is God calling us to do? Preference-driven, what do people want us to do in the church? Are we future-oriented or past-oriented? Are we innovative or routine? Is there a sameness about everything? The annual calendar is the same. The monthly calendar is the same. Everything is the same. The people who are serving in areas, there's a sameness about it. The church on the left side in the growth phase takes risk. In the declining phase, we become risk adverse. And if somebody should happen to stick their neck out and it doesn't work, watch out, watch out. A church in the growing phase is organic. A church in the declining phase has become institutional. It's about making sure all the cogs in the administrative structure are filled so that everything is running smoothly. Are we adaptable or rigid? Are we energetic or lethargic? Is there momentum, or have we become stagnant? Faith or fear? We can do that. We can't do that. The church on the left side in the growth phase, you never hear the words, "We've never done that before. We don't do that. We don't do it like that. That won't work here." Church on the right side, those are words you hear often. "We've never done that before." I experienced that. Let me let you in on a dirty little secret. The first two groups of people I talked about Feast of Praise with, the response was, "Oh, I don't know. This is North Dakota. I don't think that'll work here. We've never done anything like that before." It happens. It happens in the best of churches. I'm going to leave you in a very bad place this morning. I don't mean to, but I need to so you can think about. Before you flip to the next slide, where would you put us on the curve? Where would you put us? Draw an arrow or put an X on where you would put us at curve. Are we in that growing stage where we are aggressive, looking for people and pursuing with full passion the ministry God has for us? Or are we in a descent to death where everything is frozen and, man, this is really collapsing fast? Where do you think we are on this? If you look at the survey, and again, next week you'll have a copy of it, and if you put all the responses together, and if you look at just some of the internals of the questions and how they are ranked and organized, and put all the pieces of the puzzle together, you're able to put a mark on where we are at. This is what you have said. It isn't what I have said. You have said that we have become very institutional, that it is about the inside and not the outside. It's about, well, you see the words there on the right side of the column. That at Bethel, we have entered into a descent. And in some ways, we have traveled a bit down that descent. It doesn't mean we have to go any further. A church is able to reset. A church is able to reinvigorate. a church is able to capture new eyes where we see people outside again. A church is able to streamline an administrative structure where people, instead of serving the organization, people are really released into serving in their area of strength and giftedness and passion. Just because we are halfway down the right slope doesn't mean we are destined to continue, especially since one of our greatest strengths is that people here are passionate about the future of our church and are willing to help our leaders move us toward the changes and transformation needed to fulfill God's vision for us. But for this to happen, we must listen to the doctor. We must listen to the report he gives. And we must say yes. The things that characterize an institutional church are characterizing us. 85% of the churches in the United States are on the right slope. 85% of the churches are in that decline process. 85% of the churches. Very small is the percent of churches that will hit the reset button. And so the question for Bethel is, will we be one of those churches that is willing to hit the reset button, to reimagine, to revision, to reinvigorate what God has for us to accomplish here in this area? I know I'm leaving you with a lot of questions, and that's a good thing, because I want you to think deeply about this. Next week, we will start talking about what it means to be an institutional church. And next week, we will start talking about what does a path forward look like. What do we need to do to reinvigorate? What do we need to do to hit the reset button? I know those are all questions you have, and so we're going to be talking about that next week. But are there other questions that you might have that you want to ask this morning? That's fine. That's fine. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I went a little long, but you do have time. I would ask if you would gather in groups of 3, 4, 5. Move around the sanctuary. If you need to walk out, that's absolutely fine. But if you could take a few moments, and in your groups, let's just take this to our God. Let's cry out to God to bring a reset here. Let's cry out to God to reinvigorate. Because right now for Bethel, the number one danger of being an institutional church isn't that the next step is a descent to death. But the number one danger in being an institutional church is in a few months, you're going to have a new lead pastor. And if that lead pastor doesn't match up to the institution will crush him. And so before a lead pastor can come in and lead Bethel into the future that you have told me you want, we need to make sure that we have done some resetting. The work won't be totally done. He will need to put his fingerprints on some of it. But we need to make sure that the person that comes in isn't chewed up by an institution. And so if you could, man, that sounds somber, doesn't it? That sounds serious. It is serious. But I don't want us to miss the celebration points that you are accomplishing an incredible work, that people are living their lives in commitment to Jesus Christ. A lot of good things is is happening. And maybe one of the best things is that there is a desire to reset. There is an excitement about the future. And there are steps we can take to achieve that desired future. So if you would, just gather with some people and make these things a matter of prayer for just a few moments. That's a cue to stand up and move around a moment. Pray for the search process. Pray for me and the elders. Pray for a willingness to change.